Good evening, and welcome to a presentation of the LeMieux Center for Public Policy at Palm Beach Atlantic University. We're honored that you're present, and I know that Jeremiah Clark and Cassie Stanton are honored by your support, your prayers, your encouragement, and following their very, very well-prepared presentation, your round of applause. Thank you so much for coming. The LeMieux Fellows Program is one of the signature pillars of the LeMieux Center for Public Policy at the university. As many of you know, the university has 5 centers of excellence, and we are honored to be associated with former United States Senator George LeMieux in the development of the LeMieux Center. The LeMieux Center was begun in December of 2012, and almost immediately the Fellows Program was launched. In fact, many of you have already read the university's most recent alumni publication, which featured the LeMieux's Fellow Program. If you did not have the opportunity to see this publication and read this article, there are some extra copies in the lobby at the conclusion of tonight's event. Also, at the conclusion of tonight's event, there will be a light reception, and we hope that you stay to congratulate our presenters, as well as to ask them some questions perhaps you didn't have the opportunity to ask during the program. It's important that in addition to recognizing the 2 LeMieux Fellows, that we join in thanking Senator George LeMieux for his engagement in this learning environment at Palm Beach Atlantic University. Senator, we're grateful for your investment in these 2 students, but also in the life of the university. Thank you so much. Joining us tonight are the mentors for Mr. Clark and Ms. Stanton, Dr. Linda Rader and Dr. James Todd, both of the university's political science faculty. Dr. Rader, Dr. Todd, thank you for mentoring, ushering, shepherding Jeremiah and Cassie through this rigorous undergraduate research project. We're grateful. Now, I also want to recognize family who have joined to add their support. So if you are members of Cassie Stanton's family, would you stand so we could recognize you and thank you for coming in November when you planned to come in October. So please stand so we can thank you for coming. The program this evening is being recorded, so I invite members of the audience to remember that during the presentations. Tonight's LeMieux Fellows program is also being live streamed, which means that friends and the faithful followers of Palm Beach Atlantic University and the LeMieux Center can be watching our activities here in the Helen K. Person Recital Hall of the Vera Rinker Hall. Perhaps most importantly, however, is one viewer of the live stream, and that's Jeremiah Clark's mom. So although she's not here tonight, Jeremiah has recruited a surrogate mom for the evening. So his mom will be watching in the Bahamas, but I would invite Pam Fleming, who's serving as Jeremiah's mom, to stand up. Okay. Good choice. Good choice. Good choice. Lots of moms to choose from, but I can recognize why you were selected a LeMieux Fellow You've got good taste, Jeremiah. Good taste. Mr. Clark will make his presentation first, followed by Ms. Stanton's presentation. And then we will allow Senator LeMieux, Dr. Rader, and Dr. Todd to lead off with questions. Would you once again show your appreciation for the leadership service of Senator LeMieux as he comes to the podium now to bring greetings and offer a sense of the importance of this LeMieux Fellows Program. Senator, join us.
Well, good evening. Good evening. Good evening. Apologize for my voice. I've been in meetings all day, so it's a little on the mend, but I will do my best. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you, President Fleming, for those nice remarks. The LeMieux Center has been a joy for me and a tremendous opportunity to work with the young people who attend Palm Beach Atlantic University. There are many components to what we do. We bring in speakers. Tomorrow night we will have Senator Bob Graham here along with a panel to talk about the 9/11 papers and the recent stories that you've been reading about the connection to the Saudi government. We provide these venues for engagement, to have thoughtful conversations about the issues that are facing this country in a place that really doesn't have a lot of venues for those thoughtful conversations, that being South Florida. But what I enjoy the most about this Public Policy Center is the opportunity to work with these students, especially through the Fellows Program. And Jeremiah and Cassie are no exception to the excellent students that we've had in the 3 years that we've been doing this Fellows work. To give you a sense of what we do, we interview about this time every year a group of students, and we select 2 who will participate in the Fellows Program. And in the spring semester, those fellows, working with a faculty advisor like Dr. Todd or Dr. Rader, will undertake a substantial research project. It is really in many ways like what a graduate student would do, but they're doing it during their undergraduate experience. We will meet every other week. I come to Palm Beach Atlantic on campus and meet with the fellow along with their faculty advisor. They're meeting with their faculty advisor independent of that, and they undertake a substantial research project. This year, you're going to hear from Jeremiah, who's going to speak to you about the really important issue and constitutional issue of drones, unmanned aerial vehicles, and the constitutional implications of their use. And Cassie's going to speak to you about religious freedom and the constitutional protections that are offered for religious liberties. These are really big, weighty, important topics. And I'm so pleased that Palm Beach Atlantic is providing a venue for this kind of constructive and really thoughtful conversation. So without any further ado, I believe Jeremiah is going to lead us off tonight. He'll present to you, then Cassie, and then we'll ask some questions. Thank you very much.
Good evening, and thank you all for coming. Special thanks to Senator George LeMieux and Dr. James Todd. Without your constant wisdom and guidance, my experience would not have been as enriching. I remember specific moments from our time together. During each meeting, they would ask me a question, and it was my responsibility to find the answers to those questions. So I got a sense of what it was like to play the role of the professor for once. It was not easy. I would also like to thank my mom, who could not be here with me during this momentous occasion due to unforeseen circumstances. I want you to know that I would not be here tonight had it not been for your constant love and devotion. Also, thank you for the new shirt and tie. It really does suit me. It has been an honor and a privilege to have served as one of the LeMieux Fellows for the 2015 to 2016 academic year. Under the guidance of Dr. James Todd and Senator George LeMieux, I was given the prestigious opportunity to conduct a multidimensional analysis of US drone policy, studying things like history and technology, but most importantly, ethics. And I am here tonight to share some of the insights I gained during my research. First, I'm going to tell you briefly about the history of the drone program so that you can get a sense of how and why drone technology came to be used in the war on terror. Then we're going to talk about some of the statistics. Showing you the numbers will give you a sense of just how controversial of a topic this can be. Then I'm going to briefly look into the legal debate surrounding this policy. And then I will conclude my presentation by showing you some of the ethical issues surrounding my topic, and I will provide you with some of the policy suggestions that I developed at the end of my research. History of the drone program. The drone program is a manifestation of the desire of Western intelligence to better monitor the movements and activities of terrorists and their organizations. Earlier models of drone technology were not capable of being airborne for long periods of time, and they were primarily designed not for combat, but for surveillance and reconnaissance purposes. There was also a major legal dispute regarding the weaponization of this technology. And now, but a certain event happened that forever changed the nature of the war on terror. Hard to forget, isn't it? September 11, 2001. Many lives were lost, and that of countless others will never be the same. In the blink of an eye, the gloves were off, and the war on terror sailed to new heights. On September 17th of that same year, President Bush signed a directive that created a secret list of high-value targets that the CIA was then authorized to target without any further presidential authority being needed. This list required you to be nominated to be placed upon, and it was a very intensive bureaucratic process that the President, Obama, was required to approve the most dangerous of targets. This process centered around the question of how exactly targeting a certain individual would affect the terrorist network as a whole. All was well until near the end of the Bush administration, the president of Pakistan resigned. The US government felt as though Pakistan should no longer have a say in the strike approval process. So then, what came about at the end of this is what's known as the signature strike policy. No longer was having your name on a list a prerequisite for being targeted. You could now be targeted based on certain activities or patterns of behavior, such as carrying explosives or utilizing an Al-Qaeda compound. This policy is what created a major spike in the numbers between the Obama administration and the Bush administration, which you see before you. I also believe this was due, in part, to the reluctance of the Obama administration to use Guantanamo Bay to detain terrorists. This is what makes the drone policy such a controversial topic. With every strike, men, women, children, they die. And the numbers have undoubtedly risen since the time I last checked the numbers. But if something is not done, if no accountability is put into practice, then the numbers will continue to rise. Assessing the legality of U.S. drone policy. On September 30th, 2011, a man by the name of Anwar Awlaki became the first U.S. citizen to be targeted by the Predator drone for his active involvement with Al Qaeda from both a financial and material standpoint. This sparked a major controversy in regards to targeting U.S. citizens. Some questioned and asked for the whereabouts of the Due Process Clause. Others saw this as a major overreach of executive power. Some say that his active involvement with Al Qaeda removes all of his rights as a citizen. There is not yet a definitive answer to this question, but hopefully you're beginning to see exactly how complicated this debate can get. If your head is starting to hurt, don't worry, that's why you're down there and I'm up here. Ethical questions. Are unmanned aerial vehicles in the same ethical category as other conventional methods of warfare? What are the advantages of using this technology, and what are its disadvantages? What has changed is not what we do, but how we do it. The drone program is a continuation of a historical precedent of moving the warrior, or in this case the pilot, further and further away from his enemy. So one of the arguments made by a scholar by the name of Bradley Saucer is what's called the principle of unnecessary risk. That is, we have a moral obligation to protect our pilots from unnecessary or lethal risk unless there exists a greater good by placing him in danger. Some also see drone technology being ethically advantageous because of its ability to perform better ethically on the battlefield. What I mean by that is, they're being machines, they're no longer, not like us, hindered by their emotions, and they can get the job done without any supposed psychological trauma going on. Some of the disadvantages are, there is a fear that this rapid development of US drone technology will eventually lead to the pilot being removed from the ground control station. Here we see the picture of a US drone pilot operating from a ground control station. Ground control stations are placed usually somewhere near Nevada, but here we see him operating. You see the monitors and you see the joystick. But I'm here to tell you that the idea of possibly drones one day, pilotless armed technology flying over our heads, and we can be shot down at any moment, will not happen. This is because we have long since developed the capacity to do this, but the US government and CIA understands that in order for us to win the war on terror, then human agency must never be removed from the equation. There's also the argument of desensitization. That is that the way the strikes are carried out creates this sort of video game mentality, and you can see why. That not only hampers the pilot's ability to perform ethically, but also affects his personal life in the sense that he is no longer the same person he was after he comes home from what is, to say the least, a hard day of work. Some even found connections to this criticism and PTSD. What is perhaps the most interesting argument that I found against US drone policy during my research is the argument of counterproductivity. That is because now that we can conduct war from a safer distance away, is drone technology helping stop or reduce the war on terror, or are we merely fanning the flames? Something to think about. This here, ladies and gentlemen, is what got me interested in this topic. I enjoy immersing myself in these complex questions and trying to establish a middle ground. It certainly was not easy, but I enjoyed every second of it. Here are 5 policy suggestions that I came up with at the end of my research. Individual assessments of US drone pilots. For those that say that the use of drone technology when piloting it creates a sort of negative impact, then they should be reassigned to a different specialty or occupation. And those that say that they're fine and that is not creating a sort of negative impact can carry on their daily jobs. Greater implementation of a sniper rifle. Our troops can be placed at strategic points on the battlefield, and a predator drone can be sent in prior to this to determine the location of the enemy. This will help reduce the collateral damage and ensure that we are using drone technology only when it is absolutely necessary. For there is the claim that because the prerequisite for war has been lowered, that drones are quickly becoming the method of choice simply because of convenience. Policy suggestion 3, elimination of the signature strike policy. While I understand that drone technology may be efficient in eliminating terrorist threats, the criteria of certainty is absolutely important. We should ensure that the target we select is indeed who they say they are, and that we are searching for, and that we have exhausted every available option in order to minimize casualties. Policy suggestion 4, detainment. Guantanamo Bay should remain open, and terrorist attacks or terrorist tactics should remain abolished. Those who cooperate should be given better living conditions than those who do not. Sentences should vary on a case-by-case basis, especially if that individual is a US citizen. This will give them the opportunity to be re-implemented into society so that they can help us build this nation instead of spending so much time and energy trying to tear us down. Policy suggestion 5. Oh, by the way, I actually saw a movie about this. It's called Eye in the Sky, and no, I did not title my paper after this movie. I found out about it after my paper was written. So it's a good thing I'm a pre-law major because I smell a lawsuit. So although it was a work of fiction, it actually depicts a lot of the difficulty that arises when deciding when and when not to strike. What was initially a mere observation mission changed when it was determined that the certain individuals were present, or suicide bombers were present within the compound. And at the end of the movie, I could see the frustration on the pilot's face. Even though he knew he had authorization to now strike, he hesitated because there was an innocent girl in the way. So should he sacrifice the life of one to save many? I don't know. Something to think about. But in the case of the suicide bombers, they should be subjected to automatic drone strikes. We should not hesitate to take the lives of those who are willing to sacrifice theirs to hurt the ones we love. Another point about drones is that they may be able to destroy compounds and temporarily dismantle terrorist threats and organizations. But if we do not combat the ideology, then the war on terror will never, ever end. In conclusion, much about the CIA drone program still remains hidden from public scrutiny. What is meant by an imminent threat? How does one distinguish between a civilian and a combatant? There is no point in using drone technology to protect the American people if the American people do not feel safe. I understand that there comes a time when we have to choose to withhold certain information, but I believe that what is already known should be clearly defined. Truth is an absolute necessity, for without truth, there can be no trust. And without trust, ladies and gentlemen, there can be no future. Thank you.
Senator LeMieux, Dr. Rader, and President Fleming, thank you so much for this opportunity to be a fellow this year. I have so appreciated this opportunity, and it has shaped my worldview immensely. Thank you all for being here today, especially my parents and grandparents. To enter the United States is to enter a country founded on liberty and the ability to exercise the dictates of one's own conscience. When members of other countries hear the name America, images of freedom is invoked. This freedom is part of why people flock from all over to come to America. One of the most foundational concepts protecting American citizens is the religious liberty that our country was founded on, as stated in the First Amendment. Though this concept is foundational to the framers and our nation, a recent poll from the Newseum Institute First Amendment Center has revealed only 4 in 10 Americans can even cite a religious liberty protection. Many Americans seem indifferent to a right that is foundational to our country and take it for granted. Many Americans don't even realize that religious liberty is questioned in the public square. Today, we will explore the constitutional means established by the framers to protect the American citizens, the constitutional interpretations of these liberties, moving to groundbreaking cases of the 1940s, and finally ending with religious liberty cases of today. It is of the utmost importance we understand the provisions granted to us to protect our religious liberty, especially in a world seeking to diminish religious influence in the public square. The First Amendment of the Bill of Rights establishes 2 clauses of religious liberty, the Free Exercise Clause and the Establishment Clause, worded, "Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof." The Free Exercise Clause enables all citizens to exercise their religion according to their own conscience. Establishment promises there will never be an established national church. And please focus on this word national, as it will be important later. Drawing from our knowledge of the history of religious persecution in Europe and the Constitutional Congress and conventions, we know that the founders held all 6 of these values to be very important in their construction of the First Amendment. Number 1, we have the liberty of conscience, the freedom to think and hold sincere beliefs that require action. Number 2, free exercise of religion. The 3rd, religious pluralism. Multiple religions may exist in America. The 4th, religious equality. The 5th, separation of church and state. And finally, no establishment of a national church. Again, the founders did not come up with these values on their own. Many were established in reactions to years of European persecution with nationally established churches. Before understanding our current religious liberties in America, we must look back at Europe. After Martin Luther posted his 95 Theses declaring freedom of conscience, Protestant and Catholic frustration was on the rise because Catholicism was the established religion of the day. In 1534, King Henry VIII declared this act of succession and this nationalized the Anglican Church. Soon after, he declared the Supremacy Act. This put the monarch as the head of the church, which is a clear combination of church and state. Now, all people living in the area were asked to completely abandon their faith to convert to Anglicanism, which goes against this liberty of conscience. It is from this history that Americans surged forward, uncertain what religion apart from a national conviction would look like, but determined to try. But to say the colonists were free from religious persecution when they reached the American colonies would be erroneous. As you can see on the map, each colony established their own religion due to their charter countries. To oppose the religion of the area could lead to exile and beatings, yet places like Maryland understood the damage of not being able to follow the dictates of one's own conscience. They established the Toleration Act of 1649, followed by Rhode Island and New Jersey, who established charters banning religious persecution in the 1660s. This is what established patterns for religious liberty to come, and this is what created our nation. From these colonies' experiences, it became clear religious liberty is to be a building block in American society. John Adams identified rights of conscience as indisputable, unalienable, indefeasible, and divine. Yet many interpret the First Amendment in a way that completely skews these founders' intentions, making modern textbooks and courts alike completely disregard them. Now, if you walk away with anything from this presentation today, please get this, because this is the breakdown of religious liberty as we see it today. Though the Establishment Clause very clearly makes reference to not establishing a national church, the court has taken this to mean no state can establish church. Using the 14th Amendment incorporation tactic, the Everson versus Board of Education trial of 1947 left Justice Hugo Black stating the wall of separation in the majority opinion. However, Jefferson never intended to have religion completely separated from the public square. As he quotes in a letter to the Danbury Baptist Association, certainly no power over religious discipline has been delegated to the general government. It must thus rest with the states as far as it can in any human authority. Yet, with this jurisdiction, Black makes even local displays of religion nearly impossible. The founders wanted to protect religion from an overreaching government, not protect government from religion. They wanted a place where people could worship freely without a national mandate. These protections are rooted in the colonists' belief in a supreme being, the God of the Bible. This point holds in the colony's mandate for recognition of God to obtain citizenship, vote, or hold public office. It holds true in the fact that the very morning the Constitutional Convention commenced, Benjamin Franklin called for prayer, saying, "The longer I live, the more convincing proof I see of this truth. God is governing the affairs of men." As I flipped through the constitutional documents myself, I saw summons for divine intervention surrounding the convention. The day after the first enactment was put into place, a day of thanksgiving was enacted to honor the God who had blessed them abundantly. Now, does this sound like a group of people who are wishing to ban religion from the public square? John Adams says, "Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It was wholly inadequate to the government of any other." However, the job of interpreting the Constitution has been left up to 9 unelected justices of the Supreme Court. In Marbury versus Madison, judicial review is given to these justices as a binding tool to our Constitution, and our liberties lie in their hands. However, judicial review lies in not only knowing the words of the Constitution, but also how to interpret it, and 2 major theories have emerged to interpret the Constitution: originalism and living constitutionalism. Originalism works off the idea that the presumption of a written document is that it contains meaning intrinsically. It limits the actions of the federal government, and it holds to the founders' intentions. However, living constitutionalism believes the Constitution is a living document whose meaning changes over time. It's an embodiment of progressivist thought and denies a stagnant truth. In a book I read entitled Living Constitution by David Strauss, he claims the Constitution is a general, undefined, unillustrated, and purely ceremonial document. It's good for determining things like how old the president has to be to run for office, but appears useless for moral issues. Under living constitutionalism, justices are the ones who are left to fill these gaps. These quotes show the contrast of originalism on the top and living constitutionalism on the bottom. As you can see, these 2 theories are at odds. With living constitutionalism on the rise, justices have ultimate say over the religious liberties of the people. This is what made the election of our president that much more important for people. They are realizing the Supreme Court is beginning to bend toward a policy-making body that it was never intended to be. Due to these interpretations of the Constitution, the First Amendment has been placed in jeopardy. The change began to happen in the 1940s. Before this time, religious liberty was hardly questioned in the public square. In 1890, religion was defined as one's views to his creator, and this is public knowledge. States still had control over religious activity. But in 1944, the very definition of religion was questioned. Mr. Guy Ballard began to solicit money from people under the I Am movement as a profit. Though his religion had no reference to a god or a creator, the court declared Ballard's actions were not fraudulent. This redefined the definition of religion for the courts. Now, anything that counted as a sincere belief could be a religion. But as concepts become broadened, they become nearly impossible to define and protect. We see this again with Everson's redefinition of this wall of separation. He has redefined Jefferson's wall of separation, quote, and grossly misinterpreted it. The graph on the right shows the divide between the two, with Jefferson's wall with state and religion on one side and national government on the other. But Black's high and impregnable wall, in his own words, is between religion and the national and state government. Under the guise of separationism and neutrality, many cases have approached the bench. Separationism sought to completely separate religion from the public square. Cases like Engel versus Vitale created an environment in which school children could not say morning prayers. The same frame of thought helped establish Allegheny County, where the Nativity downtown was declared unconstitutional while the menorah was not. In McCreary versus ACLU of Kentucky, a Kentucky state capitol monument of the Ten Commandments was declared unconstitutional. But in a similar case, Van Orden versus Perry, based out of Texas, it proved to be the opposite, and their 10 Commandments were allowed to stay. The court has shown a doctrine of confusion and contradiction in religious liberty cases. The last 3 cases you'll see on the screen show a 5-4 decision. This means religious liberty was placed in the hands of one Supreme Court justice in the end. The idea of religious liberty in jeopardy has only been expanded today. It was almost overwhelming to flip through pages and pages, honestly, really thousands of grievances filed by American citizens. I had Google alerts sent to my phone to send important religious liberty updates, but I would get about 8 to 10 a day. Yeah. The interesting thing about this project for me is that it's always changing. Religious liberty cases are approaching the bench at an alarming rate. A lot of cases have come following the 2015 Oberfeld versus Hodges decision to legalize LGBT marriage. In doing this, the judges decided not what the law is, but what it should be. A right to dignity was created, usually trumping this freedom of religion right. For example, on the right, you'll see Barnell Stutzman. She has owned and operated her own floral shop for over 30 years. Though she serves and employs members of the LGBT community, she refused to use what she believes to be her gift and worship form to participate in just the actual marriage ceremony. She believes that the florals are an essential element of the ceremony itself, and it goes against her conscience. Barnell was sued. She lost her case on the appellate level, and she will be tried in the state of Washington on March 3rd. Melissa Klein refused her services under the same principles to provide a cake for an LGBT wedding. Her store was protested, and she has since gone out of business, forced to pay over $13,000 in legal fees. Finally, Klein Cochran, an Atlanta police officer, was fired back in January of 2015. His boss cites one page of a book he wrote on his personal time condemning homosexuality for Christianity. Unfortunately, these newly set precedents have had an impact on privately run institutions as well. In 2014 to 2015, Gordon College was caught in the crossfire of this backlash when the president of the school appealed to President Obama to protect religious liberties for private institutions. The community, after hearing this appeal, responded by shutting off public buildings to Gordon for rent, refusing education majors to teach in local schools, and the New England Association of Schools and Colleges questioned Gordon's accreditation. Eventually, their accreditation was upheld, but their reputation was left tarnished. Recently, this summer, Senator Ricardo Lara in California proposed the SB 1146 bill. This bill would block students from receiving federal funding if they went to institutions that refused to acknowledge same-sex marriage or refused transgenders to stay in the dorm of their choosing. 140 private institutions ended up protesting the bill, and it was dropped in July, but Senator Lara says it will resurface soon. Private adoption agencies have seen severe backlash from adhering to this traditional definition of marriage. Catholic adoption agencies have closed their doors from 2006 to 2016, with more to follow because their religion would not allow adoption from LGBT couples. Former president of the National Council for Adoption, which is a non-religious institution, says not only do these laws violate religious liberties, but they harm children because they force high-quality, compassionate social service agencies to shut down. Some religious liberty issues lie in the wake of the Affordable Care Act and the Obamacare mandate. Little Sisters of the Poor on the right won their case back in May 16th of 2016 this summer. Now religious plans do not have to include these contraceptives. The Burwell versus Hobby Lobby case in 2014 allows closely held for-profit corporations to be exempt from laws if there is better means of furthering the law's interest. This means Hobby Lobby did not have to include abortion-inducing drugs in their healthcare plan. However, the Stormans were not so lucky. The Stormans have owned and operated their family pharmacy for over 60 years. They believe life begins at conception and therefore refuse to sell abortion-inducing drugs. In 2007, the Stormans were placed under investigation and threatened with being shut down despite the fact that 30 other stores within 5 miles sold the contraceptive. The Stormans filed a case and lost. This past July, the Supreme Court refused to hear the Stormans' case. Justice Alito says, if this is a sign of how religious liberty claims will be treated in the years ahead, those who value religious freedom have great cause for concern. Currently, these states are at odds with how to handle these religious liberty violations. The Religious Freedom Reformation Act of 1993, passed with Bill Clinton in office, granted federal ability to ensure prevention from a substantial burden on religious freedom. In '97, the Borns versus Flores case handed this power back to the states. 21 states responded by immediately passing their own religious freedom reformation bills. But now, some states that never passed the bills have been trying to pass their own, met with backlash due to timing. In Indiana and Georgia, big companies like the NCAA said they would cancel all tournaments in the area if the bill was passed. Salesforce said they would offer each employee a $50,000 relocation package if the bill was passed in their state. The states of Indiana and Georgia have ended up passing watered-down versions of the bill, but states like Missouri and Mississippi are fighting for these religious freedom bills as we speak. The cause of these problems are found in the government-mandated rights versus traditional rights of the American people. This right not to be offended and the right to dignity is trumping religious freedom rights that have always been foundational to our country. Yet this comes at no surprise to those of us following the Death of God movement from the 19th century and onward. Friedrich Nietzsche declares in the 19th century, "God is dead and we have killed him." These sentiments start in Europe and have spread to the United States. Countries previously saturated and rooted in theistic religion turned to secular humanism and political religions led by thinkers and political philosophers, Karl Marx and John Stuart Mill. True religion moves to the background in Western culture, and it's no wonder we see our Constitution questioned. No longer do we share the values it was originally founded on, such as we are endowed by our Creator with natural rights. A widespread rejection of God in Western culture is challenging our institutions. As humanism is lifted up, we make ourselves small gods. Those who are practicing a religion have an easy time seeing the validity of maintaining religious freedoms in America. Religion is supposed to invade all aspects of life, including the workplace, no longer segregated to the church. To be forced to go against these beliefs is unnatural, painful, and a threat to anyone that's practicing a religion. Yet we grapple at how to explain the importance of these religious liberties to people of non-religious backgrounds. Religious liberty, unfortunately, has become a buzzword in the political sphere, given the connotation of only appealing to a certain political party, which alienates half the population. But in order to stop the decline of religious liberties, we must re-educate ourselves and others. Religious liberty is for all, the religiously devout and the atheistic, because religious liberty is founded on the idea of the liberty of conscience, and this is an ideal that everyone can get behind. Our founding fathers held liberty of conscience in the highest esteem. James Madison declares conscience as the most sacred of all property. The ability to act on our most sincere beliefs is not a gift that is given to us by government. It is a natural and God-given right of humanhood. If a government dictates religion and has control over the belief system of the people, there is really nothing too far from their reach. We see nations with religious persecution having lower GDPs and sinking quality of life measurements. Nations with religious persecution face threats to the common good as any spectrum of morality begins to collapse. But most importantly, there is unrest in these states. A government that takes away this liberty of conscience and even begins to, most profoundly expressed within the bounds of religious liberty, goes against the very fabric of our being, and people recognize this. We are human. We have free will. Freedom of conscience and furthermore, freedom of religion must be preserved. Thank you.
Senator, would you be the first to present a question to Jeremiah and Cassie?
Sure, my pleasure. I want to start with Cassie on those last remarks. And if you want to come back to the podium, that's probably the easiest thing to do. So in the Obergefell's case, this idea of the right to dignity, which is sort of a newly created right, and we've seen the Supreme Court over the past many decades create these new unspecified rights, at least not specified in the Constitution. Where do you see that headed? You can think forward about how the right to dignity could be extrapolated into other contexts. So where do you think that this might go if this thread is pulled?
Yeah, actually just 2 weeks ago, the Supreme Court decided to take a transgender bathroom case. So I'm thinking that it will just continue to be expanding and we will add these new rights. I think that by electing Trump as president and if he does appoint one of the justices that he has claimed to appoint on his list that he released, the 21 justices, I think that we will have a little bit of a delay in that, per se. I think that we will be following originalism in the original words of the Constitution.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Rader, Dr. Todd, a question for Jeremiah.
Well, oh no, not for Jeremiah. That's the
I've got a
for
Jeremiah
Cassie.
question.
Go ahead, yeah.
Good job on your presentation and your paper, Jeremiah.
Thank you.
I want to ask about the signature strike policy versus the targeted kill list. You talked about a change in policy about the end of the Bush administration, the beginning of the Obama administration. Ethically speaking, legally speaking, which approach to drone strikes do you think is more ethical, more legal, using a list of specific names or having a signature strike policy? The reason I ask is, it isn't a signature strike policy intensely legal to begin with? Aren't lawyers involved? Aren't there safeguards in place for a signature strike? You recommended abolishing signature strike policy.
Yeah. It's important to remember that just because something is legal does not make it right. And I would suggest sticking with the targeted kill list. It is more detailed and more in-depth, and it is better it better helps us to ensure that we are using drone technology only when it is absolutely necessary. Now that having the ability to just sit from your chair in the White House and approve a strike can be, in a sense, disastrous, and we have to ensure that we only use it when it is absolutely necessary. Because if you look at the numbers, we need to ensure that we are keeping the American people safe, because that is our duty, and that is why we have this policy in place to begin with.
So the targeted list is better for minimizing collateral damage, civilian deaths. Is that generally what you're saying?
Yes.
Jeremiah, I want to ask you a question as well. You talked about Anwar al-Awlaki and his killing through a drone strike back in 2011. Anwar al-Awlaki was a United States citizen. He had grown up in New Mexico but moved to Yemen and was really one of the chief architects of terrorist propaganda and terrorist recruitment for al-Qaeda. Should there have been some kind of court approval prior to the use of a drone strike on an American citizen?
Wow. You sure know how to ask difficult questions. But it goes back to the controversy regarding what is known as an imminent threat. Would trying to acquire court approval take too much time? And in that time interlude, how many people, how many children, how many women would have been targeted while we sit around debating whether or not to strike? And this is what makes U.S. foreign policy so cumbersome, so difficult, because the answer is not always simple. It's murky waters, and no one is going to agree, or not everyone is going to agree with the decisions that you make. So I think that, I honestly don't know, but it is important that as a government, we establish especially with the new administration that's going to be put into practice or place, we have to establish a precedent, because eventually other nations will come to use this technology, and so we don't want the same technology that we use to eliminate terrorist threats to come back to haunt us. So we have to make decisions that we can stand by, decisions that we can be proud of.
Let me ask you a harder follow-up.
Why not? Why not, right?
So you said you weren't sure because of the exigencies of the circumstances whether or not you would require a warrant for the targeting of an American citizen. What if the American citizen were within the United States of America?
Well, certain scholars say that because the U.S. citizen is within close proximity, that he would be more of an imminent threat, so we should strike. But other people say that because he is so close, this causes, or this could lead to a greater collateral damage being caused. So if we can strike while minimizing collateral damage to as low as possible, then yes, we should strike. If not, then no, because it is important that we use our technology, use the assets that we have to protect our people.
Thank you.
Jeremiah, let me ask a follow-up question to that.
Sure.
And then we'll return to Cassie.
Please do.
Could you clarify for the audience if the U.S. drone warfare comes under one agency or under one central command, or is it divided and this technology is shared and mobilized by multiple agencies and commands?
Okay, so while I was studying drone technology in particular, I was trying to determine the different types of Predator drones and their capabilities. And I came to realize that I got mixed up with names, because the military uses drones, CIA uses drones, the Air Force uses drones, and each one of them has a different name for it, which they could be different, or from what I understand, most of them are the same thing. There's one type of drone, which is the Predator drone. And sometimes the military and CIA could perform joint operations on a case-by-case basis. So the answer to your question is yes and no.
Well, a follow-up question to that is, in your research, how close are we to local municipal law enforcement having their own drones to fight crime on the local, state, or municipal level?
Wow. I feel as though we are very close because even though, if you realize we can just go in the marketplace and buy a drone, and though these aren't, toy drones aren't the type of drones we're talking about, drones are being sold to other countries and they are being, the ethical implications and the legal implications are being sought after to see like when and where and in what environment we could use drones. So I believe that we are very close to being able to use this technology, which is why I would encourage the future Trump administration, if I could give one word of advice, if I may, to do what I did. Look at the policy, look at the ethical implications, look at the legal implications, see what is being done, because we have to ensure that we're using our technology in the right way. So, word of advice. You're welcome, Trump.
We'll invite Ms. Stanton up now.
Well, I do have one small question for Jeremiah, an easy one. An easy one. No, and it's just displaying my ignorance of this subject. But do other nations use drones for military purposes? Is it outside beyond the United States?
I believe mainly it is for, they have drones, and they have, but it's also primarily used for reconnaissance purposes. That is exactly why I said we have to establish a proper precedent, because whatever we do, like we're the most powerful nation in the world, right? So whatever we do, other countries will follow. And whatever legal excuses we use for conducting a strike, other nations will also use. So mainly it is for reconnaissance, but they have the capacity to weaponize their technology and conduct anti-terrorist operations. And I believe especially England.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremiah.
Jeremiah, we may bring you back up, but for now, thank you very much. Cassie, I think Dr. Rader had a question for you.
Yes, I do. Cassie, recently, in recent years, you hear the progressive left increasingly using the term freedom of worship in place of freedom of religion. Do you think there's any significance to that, or?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was it Obama himself that has been quoting that recently? Yeah, I think that's important. Like I said at the end of my speech, freedom of religion is no longer confined to the church. And that's why these cases are so important, because if you're truly practicing your religion, it goes outside the bounds of just the church. So that can be in the workplace, that can be in your relationships. So yes, I think that's important. When you say freedom to worship, that's a lot different than saying freedom of religion broadly out there in the public square. And I unfortunately think it could be purposeful.
So I loved your little chart where you showed the two different views of separation. And what I learned in our work together is that the founders' view was that states could adopt religions. In fact, the states did, right? Some states had a state religion for a period of time. So play that forward for me. If we would have followed that path, would there have been some states that would have had the sort of open, non-sanctioned religion, but some states would have said, yes, we're an Anglican state, we're a Presbyterian state?
Yeah, that's kind of hard because we're so far from that now. But I guess looking at the chart, there was established religions in each one of those states, and I think that worked fairly well for them. But moving forward, if we were to have done that, I guess we would have seen less barring on other people's religious freedoms. I think people could go to places where their state was allowing of certain practices. It could be slightly divisive, but I think that's kind of what they're trying to do with these state religious freedom the state-run Religious Freedom Reformation Acts. So back in '93, there was the General Religious Freedom Reformation Act passed under Bill Clinton. But when that was handed back to the states, they started passing their own Religious Freedom Reformation Acts because that power was given back to them. So I think if we were to allow that today, it would kind of look like how states are trying to now. It's not necessarily them mandating religion, but it's them basically trying to take back control of religion. So again, Mississippi and Missouri are trying to pass their own versions of these bills as we speak right now.
Has there been an evolution when it comes to support for religious freedom laws? It seems like they were a bipartisan thing back in the 90s, and now that more Christian groups are taking advantage of religious freedom statutes like Hobby Lobby, are you seeing evidence that maybe the left is breaking away from religious freedom laws? Did that come up in your research at all?
Yeah, it's really interesting that you say that, because about 2 weeks ago, Mr. Julian Castro, who I believe is the head of the Commission on Civil Rights, released a report and actually said that currently religious freedom has become a code word for bigotry in America. And it's hard to hear someone on the state level coming out with a report like that in an official document. So yes, I think that there has been a shift. I said in my research that Hillary Clinton and Senator Chuck Schumer were original supporters, and then Chuck Schumer was the co-sponsor of the Religious Freedom Reformation Act, which is very nearly worded to the ones that are trying to be passed now back in '93. And obviously their views have completely shifted. They're tweeting out things like, I can't believe that this would happen in America today. And it's funny because it's like, but 13 years ago, you were the ones that were supporting this. So yeah, there's been a little bit of a shift from what I see.
From peyote Indians to evangelical Christians. Right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Cassie, I have another question. What do you make of, I think, what can only be regarded as the tactic of coercion used by, say, in Indiana, in Georgia, North Carolina, threatening, say, in Georgia, and in Indiana successfully, to businesses are moving out of the area unless you abandon your this Religious Freedom Act and so forth. They seem to have worked successfully and being emulated. North Carolina is a slightly different, there's pressure there as well. But what do you make of, it just seems to me to be outright coercion.
Yeah, absolutely, it's coercion. And I only mentioned two. There's a whole list of people that are like, if this is passed, we are pulling out of this state, we're refusing to support Indiana in this way. I think it is direct coercion. It's kind of an elimination of freedom in some ways, because people are not forced to pass that law. They're not going to be able to, because that would completely tank Indiana and Georgia.
Right, well, they're given the choice, do it our way, or we're taking all this business out of Atlanta, Indiana. And it seemed to be, alarmingly, from my perspective, it seems to be working in various cases.
Absolutely. The governors were actually, they started in support of these bills, and then as people, big corporations like the NCAA, Salesforce, began to come out with these statements saying, if this is passed, then we are doing this, we're pulling all of our games, etc. The governors changed their views on it, and it was shifted so that it would be adopted for certain things to be taken out of these bills.
Just one more question. Do you think you could elaborate a little bit and maybe discuss what you think might be the impact of the recent election on this larger issue of religious liberty? I know you mentioned the Supreme Court justices, but any other significance that you perceive?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, like I said, since the Supreme Court has been beginning to shift toward a policy-making body, I think that is of the utmost importance. That's number one, to see how we will, whether we will decline to be shifting and continuing to go down this path. So due to President Trump's election, if he is to actually nominate one of the 21 justices that he has released to the American public, I think that they will be putting a bit of a halt on that movement forward, because I think that they will begin to be less of a policy-making body that way. And just looking at the words of our Constitution, I'm uncertain as to other implications, but I'm sure there will be plenty. I think we've seen backlash in the media right now from his election, but we will see.
Well, let me just mention one bit of good news. Apparently the legislature, who was, I guess, you know the case about out in Oregon where that baker was fined $135,000 or something and put out of business. Well, he lost his re-election bid. The voters threw him out. So it's not just the courts, I think, that are responding this way. I think people more generally are sort of, at least in that case, they put him out of office. So it's a little bit good news.
Cassie, I've received a note from Jeremiah that I should ask you 2 questions.
Please.
So allow me to ask 2 questions, the second one being hypothetical. First one is, as a Christ First University, Palm Beach Atlantic University students and faculty are primarily focused on issues on religious freedoms that are touching the nerves of evangelicals. And you've commented brilliantly on that this evening. In your research, did you sense that there is a growing voice from leaders of non-Western religions who also may feel an infringement by this movement that you've so well established? Did that come into any of your research, or was most of your examples related to Protestant Catholicism point of view?
So is your question, are other religions impacted by?
Are other religion, and are their voices being expressed? Because we're focused on the voices in an evangelical community across the country. Were you hearing and reading about leaders of non-Western religions who were also perturbed, concerned, confused by this drift in the United States?
Absolutely, and I mainly focus on domestic issues, but non-Western religions that are prevalent in the United States has been extremely impacted by these religious freedom diminishing. I think that with the Indiana bill, it was passed, and it actually has helped a lot of people in the Muslim faith just immediately, right off the bat when it was passed. Some that were in jail were not being given food that was coherent with their religion. So they had actually spoken out saying, please stop trying to shut down these bills. They're helping people of all religions, not just Christianity. So yes, I have seen that. I know Dr. Todd recently did a project, I don't want to completely share that for you, but he did a project this summer with Jake Weirs, a student, and it did say that there was more Christian cases that were being turned down, but it does impact all religions.
My hypothetical question. So several times in your presentation you mentioned the NCAA, and joining us this evening in our audience is the athletic director of Palm Beach Atlantic, Carolyn Stone. Mrs. Stone and I, from time to time, are concerned about the inclusivity mandate of the NCAA. If you were the president of Palm Beach Atlantic University,
Tough shoes.
and were pressed to sign a pledge for inclusivity, which was counter to the core evangelical guiding principles of Palm Beach Atlantic, how would you navigate that assignment?
Well, I'm not.
We're listening.
I am not as eloquent as President Fleming will ever be, but if I was pressed to answer this, I would say that Palm Beach Atlantic University will not shake on its principles. We are a principled, Christ-first university, and we stand behind that. And I think seeing in California, this was beginning to shift. Senator Ricardo Lara said federal funding will be pulled from schools that don't believe in X, Y, and Z, and I think that's a little bit what you're alluding to. And 140 institutions released statements against this and protested this. And I think I would like to believe that's what Palm Beach Atlantic University would do as well. They would stand up for what they believe in and not allowed to be coerced by larger corporations. And I'm proud to go to a university that I believe would support the principles that we stand on.
Thank you. Senator LeMieux, Dr. Rader, Dr. Todd, additional questions for either Jeremiah or Cassie?
Well, I'm just wondering if anyone in the audience has any questions for either of them. There might be some. Anyone have any?
I think they're all stunned by the brilliance of our two presenters. The LeMieux Fellows Program brings together serious scholars for serious thought, serious reflection. We hope that you have enjoyed this serious conversation this evening. Would you join me in acknowledging the brilliant presentation based on their research of Cassie Stanton and Jeremiah Clark? Once again, we remind you that tomorrow evening in the Lassiter Rotunda of the Warren Library, the LeMieux Center has the opportunity to interview and visit with former Florida Governor and Florida Senator Bob Graham. You're invited to that program. We hope to see you. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Good night.